October, the time of spooky things, the changing of the seasons, and white girls buying everything pumpkin spice off the shelves by the dozens. So in order to get into the mood, I figured I would give my top 10 video games to play this Halloween. Remember, this is my list, my opinion, so if you disagree with me, or if I forgot to put your favorite game on the list, remember that differentiating opinions make the world go round, and to only kill me a little bit. I'm going to operate by standard top 10 rules. Only one game per franchise. These can either be spooky or Halloween themed, or they can just be straight up horror games, and these are all games that I myself have played at some point. So if a specific game doesn't make the list, I may not have ever played it. And with that, let's begin. Number 10, The Evil Within. This game just came out, and its subject matter and how much I've personally been enjoying it earns it the 10th spot on this list. The game follows Detective Sebastian Castellanos as he has the worst case of wrong place, wrong time ever after he responds to a call to investigate the scene of a mass murder at Beacon Mental Hospital and finds himself in an odd world with chainsaw-wielding maniacs and Hot Topic rejects with some sweet barbed wire jewelry. Regardless of how critics and others felt about this game, I've been enjoying it, and though it isn't the scare fest many thought it would be, it does have a very good atmosphere and the story is interesting. Although not scary by traditional means, the game is very tense at times, which is only helped by the sound design, which has moments of silence, littered with groans and disgusting squishy noises from all around. There were a couple of times that I would get caught off guard by the sounds of monsters walking through what sounded like mud and coming around a corner at me. Locations like abandoned towns, creepy hospitals, and basements that wouldn't feel out of place in Freddy Krueger's Nightmare Land add to the spooky imagery. It has a ton of quiet time where you question when you're going to get ambushed by enemies, and with a pretty limited ammo supply, each encounter is a dreaded experience where you find your ammo diminishing quickly, and in this game, low ammo is probably going to lead to a few game over screens. The combat is brutal, enemies do a ton of damage, and some even have instant kill attacks. This adds to the tension by making you not want to get into fights, because each fight could very well end with your demise. Along with that, a lot of areas are full of traps, so if you try to rush through, you'll likely fall victim to a couple of them. My problem with a lot of the third-person action horror games is that they're sometimes too easy, and when playing on the hard difficulty, it can get a little bit overwhelming. But here, the normal difficulty is challenging, and I feel like that only helps me get into it a little more. On top of all of that, the game's theme is more occult than the games that Mikami became famous for. It's more akin to Silent Hill than Resident Evil. The scenes can shift at any time to an other world, and you'll have a lot of psychological moments where you'll be washed away by waves of blood or experience seemingly endless hallways. As stated before, the game is by no means the scariest or the most original, but its availability at the moment and its fun factor give it a spot here. Number 9. Zombies Ate My Neighbors. I remember playing this game co-op at a friend's house constantly when I was a kid. Although not scary, it does have zombies, and that's all that matters, right? There's not really much in the way of plot. It was released for the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis, and that generation of games aren't always praised for their moving, complicated plots, but it does have one. A mad scientist created a bunch of monsters, blah blah blah, and you, as two teenagers, have to use what's at your disposal to stop them. The game takes an overhead perspective, and your goal is to rescue civilians in order to progress to the next level. Not too much different than a lot of Super Nintendo games, but hear me out. Co-op or single player, this game is a lot of fun to play. It controls well, and it's great for the time it was made. As you run around, you'll find different interesting weapons and fight enemies like the titular zombies, Jason Voorhees wannabes, Martians, werewolves, and giant babies. Its design and the enemies are, for lack of a better word, a love letter to B horror movies. Hell, I half expected Bruce Campbell to make an appearance somewhere. On your scavenger hunt with your trusty pistol filled with holy water, these design choices really break the monotony. There's really not much to say here. It's really fun, and if you can get a copy of it, or if you can get it on Virtual Console, you should really play this game. Number 8, Left 4 Dead 2. Don't really want a scary game or want to think about a lot of symbolism, but still want to use guns to shoot up a bunch of zombies? Have 3 other friends you want to do it with? Left 4 Dead 2 is the game for you. In Left 4 Dead 2, you take control of 4 survivors of the zombie apocalypse and you must, well, shoot zombies and get through levels. The levels themselves are almost standalone campaigns, presented as movies starring the 4 survivors. Though there isn't really much of a story or character progression, it isn't devoid of anything interesting in between the zombie genocide. The characters do talk to each other and there are some little bits of story sprinkled into the game. As previously stated, the levels are presented as scenes from a movie starring our protagonist, so there is a goal to each stage. The zombies in this game are not the ones ripped out of the zombie cliches of yesteryear. They will bum rush you at their earliest convenience, and this can lead to some very tense firefights when you get surrounded quickly. Along with the fast-moving zombies, you have special infected that can easily give you an early death. Most notably, you have the boomers, who are bloated monsters that will vomit bile at you, and if you're hit with it, it will attract nearby enemies. And of course, if you are too close to one, when you shoot it, its stomach contents will spill out, providing the same effect. You have the smoker, who will use its long tongue to strangle you and pull you around, and when it's killed, as its name implies, expels a cloud of smoke that will impede your vision. Then you have the tank, a gigantic beast that would give a certain green angry superhero a fight for his life. If you don't work together, you will die very quickly around the tank. Of course, who can forget about the witch? As you get closer to her, you'll hear her crying, and if you don't walk on eggshells around her, she will awaken and kill you in one hit. The second game in the series brings in a couple of new special infected. The Charger, the Spitter, and the Jockey, who will ride you around like he's got a lot of money on you to win the horse race. In general, the second game adds a lot to the formula and is an all-around better game. New weapons, ammo types, and melee weapons make the game a little bit more fleshed out than the original. I've always thought of these games as great, dumb fun, especially with friends. Though it isn't the most mentally stimulating or starring the most complex characters, it can be a lot of fun. If you're looking for a co-op game to play at a Halloween party or to just play with a few friends, this is the one. Number 7, Outlast. This game. The first time I played this game was at a friend's house while we were drinking, and needless to say, that was a horrible idea. There were quite a few times where we had to question whether or not we had shit our pants. Anyway, after receiving an anonymous tip of inhumane experiments at Mount Massive Asylum, Miles Upshur, a freelance journalist, investigates the scene, and in stereotypical horror fashion, finds some messed up stuff going on, courtesy of the Murkoff Corporation. The mutilated corpses of the staff can be found all over, along with a dying SWAT member with an enigmatic message to get the fuck out. But sadly, once he realizes what kind of shitstorm will come his way if he hangs around for much longer, he no longer has a choice and is soon trapped inside with the monsters who caused the ruckus, called variants. The game is very similar in gameplay to titles like Amnesia, in that you play in a first-person perspective and have no means to fight back against the beings who wish to see you shish kebabbed, in this case with the exception of your trusty camera. As you explore the very grim asylum, you'll encounter non-violent NPCs who are, for lack of a better word, fucked up. You never really know which ones will be violent and which are purposed just for a jump scare or two. The game's lack of friendlies and its gory, dirty atmosphere lead to a feeling of extreme tension, and when one of the residents of the asylum decide to say hi, it can cause the jump scares to be much more effective. Of course, I'm forgetting to talk about the roid-raging variants and the crazy doctors that will chase you around and try to turn your insides into your outsides. Sadly, these chase sequences are the only real downside of the game, as sometimes you'll end up playing a fun game of running around the table. But this game is more filled with adventuring and observing, so I'm not going to give it too many points off for that. I sadly haven't played any of the other games of this style, which is why they're not going to take this spot instead of Outlast. And PT, though much more atmospheric and truly scary, is just a teaser for a full product that we have not yet seen. Either way, this is a great game, and if you play it in the dark with your headphones on, be sure to bring your brown pants. Number 6, Bayonetta 2. Character action games normally bore me. I know I'm gonna get hate for that one, but bland characters and a combat system that is either too complicated or filled with too much button mashing normally just go over my head. But Bayonetta really put its hooks in me from the first cutscene. This second game has just come out and I haven't played it much, but considering the praise it got and how much I love it so far, it's gonna be a part of this list. And I know it really isn't a scary or spooky game, but it has a lot of occult imagery. You fight angels and demons, and you even get to go to hell yourself. Bayonetta is a witch, who is wearing a suit made of her own hair. Yes, I said that correctly. All of her special attacks cause her to either use her hair suit to make a giant monster to beat up her enemies, or conjure up random torture devices to beat them into submission. Of course, when she uses her hair suit as an attack, she loses some of her suit, and that's all I'm going to say about that. This game at no point takes itself seriously, and that adds to the charm immensely. The subject matter of the game is somewhat serious, but the dialogue, the characters, and the story itself are so over the top and ridiculous that it kind of evens out a little bit. That isn't saying the writing is bad by any means. If anything, the writing and the voice acting benefit from it, and you can tell that the voice actors are having a little bit of fun with it. Bayonetta's interactions with the other characters are incredibly enjoyable, especially with her sidekick Enzo, who seems to be directly influenced from Joe Pesci. Combat in Bayonetta, though heavily influenced from games like Devil May Cry, feel in a league of its own. It feels much more satisfying when you pull off a move, and even if you're not the best at this game, you feel a sense of satisfaction from doing somewhat basic combos. There's also the addition of Witch Time, which is a bullet time-esque mode that activates when you dodge at the last moment possible before taking damage. This not only emphasizes the need for quick wits and good timing, but it also adds a layer to the combat that isn't there in a lot of other character action games. I'd like to think I'm pretty okay at playing video games, but with a lot of character action games, I feel like I just don't get it. I don't know what it is. I just am never good at them. With the exception of this one. Even if I can't get the combos right every time, as long as I dodge, activate Witch Time, and do pull off some combos, it seems like I get gold or platinum medals in each fighting section, and that's much more enjoyable to me. I'm sure some people would say that that makes the game easy, but I don't think so. It just offers different ways to play for everybody. Either way, this game doesn't take itself seriously, and in my opinion is a great replacement for Devil May Cry, which Capcom seems to want to forget about and pretends it never existed. If you're looking for a fun game with no scares, but still with some occult themes, you can pick up Bayonetta on the PS3 and the Xbox 360, or the original double pack with the sequel on the Wii U. Number 5. Eternal Darkness. Though the GameCube wasn't the best received console Nintendo ever put out, it did have a lot of gems on it. This is one of them. The game revolves around Alexandra, who is investigating the mysterious murder of her grandfather. As she explores his Rhode Island mansion, she discovers a secret room and a book bound with human skin and bone. Well, this book is called The Tome of Eternal Darkness, and as she reads it and finds other chapters of the tome around the mansion, she relives the experiences of people all across time who have at some point come into contact with the tome. All of these people come from different time periods and locations, which breaks up the gameplay quite a lot. This game is known for its fourth wall breaking. As your sanity meter goes down, you experience weird occurrences in your game. Sometimes it can be as small and subtle as a skewed camera angle, but if your sanity meter gets too low, you can experience blue screen errors, which is a little weird considering you're not playing on a computer, or your game can erase its own save file. Yes, that's a thing. Don't worry, it isn't for real though, your save file is safe. The game literally trolls you. And that isn't it. There are a few more, but I won't spoil the fun. Besides that, the gameplay takes the shape of most other survival horror games of the generation. Third-person view, weapons, shooty, stabby, bang-bang action, and tank controls. It works though. It doesn't play any better or worse than any of the other games of the generation. The difficulty, however, is presented in a very interesting way. I won't spoil any of the story aspects of it, but at the beginning of the game, you choose one of 3 options that are tied to the story, which is an interesting way to go about it. You can either have stronger enemies, enemies that basically explode when they die, or enemies that will sap more sanity from you. If you ask around, I'm sure a lot of people will tell you what a hidden gem this game is. It's almost the poster boy for underrated games. Sadly, however, Eternal Darkness never got a legitimate sequel. It almost got a spiritual successor through Kickstarter, but it didn't make the funding. Though the gameplay itself isn't much different than most games of the genre, the sanity effects and the game taking place in different time periods makes this a fun playthrough. Number 4, Silent Hill 3. A staple of the survival horror genre, Silent Hill is of course at home on this list. I'm picking the third entry in the franchise because opinions. The game takes place 17 years after the first game, where Harry Mason ended the plans of the resident cult of Silent Hill to bring a new god into the world, and in the canonical ending is given a baby girl to take care of. That baby girl is the protagonist of this lovely game. Meet Heather Mason, a sassy teenage girl who very stereotypically starts her adventure in a shopping mall. After avoiding a creepy private investigator looking to talk to her about her past and killing a monster, and without even taking any gun safety courses, she finds herself in a demonic version of said shopping mall and must escape. Black Friday in Silent Hill sure is a bitch, huh? This title retains the same gameplay that the previous entries in the series did, in that it's a third-person, explory, puzzle-solvey, shooty kind of game. Heather must solve puzzles and kill or evade monsters to progress, and as with the other games, she experiences the trademarked otherworld that Silent Hill is known for. While the town or the locations themselves aren't anything that will make you scream, the otherworld is filled with much more frightening imagery. The blood all over and sometimes finding something as weird as a key in a dead dog make the demonic counterparts of these locations much more creepy. If you've ever played a Silent Hill game, this won't be anything too out of the ordinary in terms of enemies or locations, but I picked this game specifically because I really enjoy the cult aspect of the Silent Hill franchise, and I really like the continuation of the original game's story. I also much more enjoyed the story of this game. It was more fleshed out and felt more like a continuing storyline instead of tiny bits of story broken up by puzzle solving and wandering about. Whereas many people don't remember the first game in the series and everyone thinks the second game is by far the best, I think that this game took what Silent Hill 2 did and improved on it. The combat, though not anything revolutionary, feels a little more put together and easier to pull off. That and following a young girl who is quite literally paying for the sins of her father, instead of wrestling with the idea of killing your own wife, feels a little more real to me. I know the second game in the franchise is a lot of people's favorite, but I saw that twist coming a mile away the first time I played it. There are a lot of survival horror staples, and Silent Hill is definitely atop a lot of people's lists for horror games. So this Halloween, if you're going to go for one of the famed Silent Hill games, I'd pick this one. Number 3, Dead Space. Another great horror game with lots of action for some fun. Although a lot of typical survival horror games take place in spooky mansions and castles, and most games that have tried to tackle the sci-fi space horror genre have failed to capture the same feeling as movies like Alien, Dead Space succeeds in being different from most and a scary experience. You are Isaac Clarke, mute protagonist, that is, until he decides to open his big mouth in the sequels, and engineer, as he and crew are investigating a distress signal sent by the USG Ishimura, a large ship called a planet cracker. Isaac is emotionally attached to this mission because this is ironically the same ship his girlfriend Nicole was working on. Obviously, they show up and the shit hits the fan almost immediately as monsters known as necromorphs kill everyone except for him and 2 others. After one of the most intense opening scenes in a game ever, you then go from place to place with the only real goal of getting the hell out of there. In order to succeed at this game, you're going to have to throw your normal zombie game notions out the window, as the aim for the head solution no longer works, and you're going to have to dismember the necromorphs to put them down for good. Some even like to play dead, and you'll have to make them say hello to your big space boot in order for them to stay down. At release, this game was praised for its atmosphere, and it deserves it. The tension in this game is so thick you could cut it with Isaac's plasma cutter very easily. They like to play little tricks on you in that the music can be very misleading. There's a ton of quiet time, and in most games of this genre, that means you're normally safe until the music starts to pick up. But in Dead Space, you're never safe. Enemies will attack in quiet time, and loud music isn't always indicative of approaching danger. It may be a cheap way to scare you, but it works and will leave you constantly watching your back. I'll put it to you this way. When I was living with a bunch of friends, my roommate picked up this game and all of our other roommates were on vacation, so me and him spent the night playing through this game, although I was the spectator. The next day over breakfast, he said to me something along the lines of, "Man, when we fought those enemies last night, that was really scary." Even though I was the spectator, not the player, I agreed because it truly felt like the two of us were both playing the game. If you're more on the wussy side but still want to watch a scary game being played, this is the one. It's pretty cinematic, and being the spectator, in my opinion, doesn't take away from the experience. If the sequels to Dead Space didn't follow the Resident Evil formula and bring a lot of action into the games, it would have been a legendary survival horror franchise. Problems and lackluster sequels aside, this game is great, and if you're more for sci-fi, this is the game for you this Halloween. Number 2, Resident Evil 2 and 4. I know I said no two games from one franchise, but that's why they're both in the same number. Haha, loopholes. What is a Halloween games list without Resident Evil? Resident Evil is one of the pioneers of survival horror, and these two are, in my opinion, the best of them. Many may argue that 3 or Code Veronica are good, but I much more enjoy the second and the fourth. And of course, both of them star Leon S. motherfucking Kennedy. Anyway, Resident Evil 2 follows Leon on his first day of work at the Raccoon City Police Department. In another case of wrong place, wrong time that seems to be popular in survival horror, he pulls up to find the city in ruins, swarming with undead baddies who are looking to give him a hickey he'll never forget. He soon runs into Claire, who is looking for her brother Chris, who is one of the protagonists of the first game and a member of the elite task force STARS. Along with that, they're trying to figure out what the hell is going on and why the dead are walking the streets of Raccoon City. The gameplay, like most horror games of the generation, is third person with pre-rendered backgrounds and a fixed camera. This is the game series that everyone seems to remember when talking about tank controls. If you're unfamiliar, in order to turn around, you have to press left or right to physically turn your character around. If this is a problem, and if you can find it, or if you're playing on an emulator, try and find the Nintendo 64 version which has analog controls. Other than that, the game should play pretty similar to other games of the genre. Solve weird puzzles, shoot things, and try not to die. Ammo is limited, and you aren't required to kill every zombie, so running could save you precious ammo and potential damage. As I've said before, though the game isn't that far off from other games on the list, this is one of the games that are the reason for those other games existing. Resident Evil started a revolution in horror games, and this game continued that legacy until Capcom decided to kill it. Resident Evil 4, on the other hand, stars the much hunkier Leon Kennedy, who, after the Raccoon City incident, became a government agent, and is now on a mission to save the president's daughter, who was kidnapped by a sinister cult. From there, the game embraces its campy roots and has a weird, creepy Napoleon cosplayer take the role of the main villain for a while. Though not bad, there are a lot of cringeworthy scenes in this game's story. This is where the game series took a turn for the action-y styled gameplay that we know from the newer Resident Evil games, although this is, for a lot of people, the best game in the series, and for some, their favorite game ever. It does still have a somewhat tense atmosphere a lot of the time, but it isn't the same feeling of other horror games nor the older games in the series. The slow-moving zombies from the first 3 games are nowhere to be seen, and instead of the T-virus, you are fighting villagers in a rural area of Spain who are under the influence of a parasite. They use weapons and are much faster and smarter than the inhabitants of Raccoon City. The 4th installment of the Resident Evil series ditches the pre-rendered backgrounds and opts more for an over-the-shoulder camera view, and boy does that make a world of difference. This game controls so much better than the previous entries, and it feels great to play. Sadly though, there are a lot of quick-time events, and there are some weird enemy takedowns that you can do where Leon basically spin kicks his enemies. These kind of things take me out of the experience a little, but they may not do that to you, so you've been warned. And also, a lot of the game takes the role of an escort mission for Ashley, the president's daughter. You have to make sure she doesn't die or get carried away by a cult member, or else you'll get a game over. The reason why I picked both of these games is because despite each of their very obvious flaws, together they represent the original face of survival horror, both for my generation and the younger one. I grew up playing Resident Evil 2 on the Nintendo 64, and I have a lot of friends whose first dip into the series was with the 4th entry. Neither of these games are by themselves perfect, but nostalgia and what they represent cements these games' spot not only on this list, but forever in the forefront of people's minds when discussing horror games. Number 1. Castlevania Symphony of the Night. I know this probably isn't too much of a surprise, but this game deserves it, as well as the other countless praise it has received elsewhere. On top of it being a great game and a classic, its atmosphere and design is drenched with spooky and gothic imagery. As with every other Castlevania game, you're tasked with stopping Dracula, after his castle appears out of thin air as it always does. But this time, you're not the whip-wielding, slow-moving member of the Belmont clan that you would normally control. You take control of Alucard, Dracula's own flesh and blood. What kind of self-centered bastard names his own son his own name backwards? Well, I guess it's not really that surprising from the Prince of Darkness himself. Anyway, the game starts on the ending from the last game, as Richter Belmont defeats Dracula, which is a great contrast to the rest of the game. It's almost like them showing you the difference between the Belmonts and Alucard, and how much better it feels to take the reins of a vampire rather than a vampire killer. After defeating Dracula as Richter, you'll take control of our white-haired vampire Alucard as he super power walks up to Daddy's castle and jumps through the closing drawbridge. Upon arriving to the castle, he takes down large wolves and zombies with ease, and you get a good feel for Alucard's power. He is then greeted by his daddy's lackey, Death, and is stripped of all of his shiny gear in an attempt to halt his progress. Then you get to do some exploring. Eventually, you'll meet up with a girl named Maria who is looking for Richter, who went missing 4 years ago. The game, instead of the traditional linear platformer that almost all Castlevanias have been up to this point, this game looks and plays a lot more like Metroid, in the sense that you have big open areas for you to explore with little to no direction. This is where the term Metroidvania comes from, this exact game. Up until Symphony of the Night, all Castlevanias had been platformers that had a linear progression. Like the Metroid series, this title gives you little to no direction, and you are free to explore to your heart's content until you run into an area that is blocked off for you until you find the required power-up. This leads to a lot of aha moments, when you'll find an item that allows you to bypass some sort of barrier, and you'll think back to rooms where you're blocked off from progressing and return there with your new power. Different to the Metroid games, however, this game has a leveling system similar to an RPG. As you defeat enemies, you gain experience points to level up Alucard. You can also find different weapon and armor around the castle that will provide stat boosts or do specific things. Castlevania as a series has always been spooky themed. I mean, in every game you're tasked in killing Dracula. On top of that, enemies almost always are either mythical or characters of classic horror movies. In Symphony of the Night, you'll fight Death, Frankenstein, Cerberus, and many more. All of these things are why it's my #1 game to play this Halloween. So that was my list of games to play this Halloween. If you disagree, or if I forgot to put a good one on the list, please let me know in the comments section below. And if you liked the list, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more videos.